Hey guys, Linton here, back for some more Below the Line. This is a series where I look back through comments that you guys have made on my videos in the past week or so and then discuss around them. I also want to say I'm sorry I haven't posted many videos this week, guys, but as you know, I've been a bit ill. I've just been recovering, and that with work, I've been just basically exhausted, so I've just not really been having the energy to late night create videos. The most I managed to get out this week was my Arma stream, so that was good. Anyway, let's start off with Chris Smeets, who says, "Hey Luton, been thinking about this for a few days now after seeing some of the sponsored Division videos. Do you think the alternative review media, for lack of a better word, is at risk of falling into the same pit of losing credibility as mainstream review media by seemingly more and more sponsored videos?" Mainstream review media is stuff like Polygon, IGN, Kotaku, any big gaming news site. To explain it in a bit, it's rather uncommon to see the mainstream review sites give a score of under, let's say, a 7 out of 10, meaning they kind of become useless since 90% of those games fall in to the 7 out of 10 category. If it gets below that, it usually means it's really bad, and this is not something I came up with, but somewhat common knowledge, I suppose, among people who are a bit into gaming. I would agree. As a reaction, other forms of reviews such as YouTubers filled this gap of honest reviews, where someone with a lot of subs could get away with being very critical of a game because people came to that channel for exactly that. Something like Angry Joe's show is a prime example of this, but not specifically about that channel in any way. It seems that publishers have caught onto this, seeing as there are quite a few sponsored videos out there. I noticed it with The Division, Far Cry Primal before that, but also EA's Ronku with Star Wars Battlefront and Battlefield games previously like Hardline or Battlefield 4. And even though it has to be mentioned when a video is sponsored, I do wonder if this doesn't set for the decline of trust in the views expressed by YouTubers in general. And as mentioned in the article linked below, not going with the sponsor deal could mean they're missing out with an early hands on the game, and that's very true. He links an article here as well, which I'll put down below if you guys want to check that out. Don't get me wrong on this, I'm not trying to put a mark on the big bad gaming industry. They're an industry like any other, after all, that wants to make a profit. But I'm wondering if this will have an effect on how credible or trustworthy views by YouTubers are perceived, and to an extent if that would cause a shift in the future to another media, similar to how it went from gaming magazines to YouTube. So what are your views on this? You think people will lose their trust in YouTubers over time, or you think it'll be regarded as just another form of advertisement and people looking for reviews will still look at non-sponsored videos? He also says, "Sorry for my English, it's not my first language. You did awesome, dude. It's all absolutely perfect." Anyway, my thoughts on this. Well, you know, this is an interesting one because obviously as a YouTube producer, I have worked with companies where I have done some sponsored videos in the past. The EA Ronku one is the most obvious there. I can't think of anything other like that though that I've done where I've actually been paid for it, because the Ronku program, obviously YouTubers get paid by EA for those videos. But here's the thing, let me just explain very clearly about this. Basically, the way I looked at this initially is that I would never make a video, and right from the very first time this was suggested and I discussed about that, was I would never make a video where I literally was paid to give a positive review on it. I would never do that. The way in which I perceived the EA Ronku and the sponsored videos that we produced there were that these were essentially incentivized videos. They were saying like, hey, we would like people to make videos talking about this topic or another. Now, whether or not you give a positive or negative to that, that's really neither here nor there, So very much so, and I had this discussion with producers, and I had some producers say to me things like, well, surely if we're making videos we can't be negative because they're paying for us to make the video. I said that's bullshit. I was like, no, they're not paying us to make a positive video, they're paying us to make content. Okay, so that's the way I looked at it. I said that, well, I'm going to make my content, and I'm going to make the content that I think about that, so I'm going to maybe talk about this or this. And another way of looking at it is that, and I had a couple of producers say this to me as well, was that, maybe the way in which you approach it is you approach it more passively. So you don't necessarily create any content which gives an opinion one way or the other. You just make content where you say like, okay, I'm showcasing a mechanic in the game. Because basically I think the way that publishers will look at YouTubers creating content is more, like I say, from an advertising perspective. It's not necessarily about reviews. It's not necessarily to get YouTubers and things to say like, hey, you should definitely buy this game. Okay, I don't think that's good at all. That's not good for people to be, sponsored to be saying like, definitely get this game. But YouTubers who have like a big audience, obviously that's a advertising tool that publishers are going to want to use, because you have a big audience there, you have a court audience, and therefore any content that they put out is going to catch that audience, it's going to get people to look, it's going to be eyes on the product, right? So really, I think that's where it comes down to. I think it's less about people literally saying like, get this product, you should definitely buy it, and more about saying like, hey, look at this thing here, and then make your own decision. That's the way, I mean, and that's the way I've looked at it. When I've made content in the past, I've definitely looked at it from that perspective, where when I've wanted to make my content, it's been more about, well, look, I'm going to make content talking about this feature in the game, or just about something in the game here, and then, you know, I will say what I think about that, and then people can make up their own conclusion about that afterwards, right? Now, there have been some issues with these kind of things where, say for example, like in the parameters or something, or with any company with an NDA or something, they'll very often say, can you please not speak about the bugs in the game or anything like this or whatever. Now again, some people freak out about that because they think like, oh my god, they're saying that you can't say about bad things in the game, they're making sure that you only talk about the positives, they're lying, they're paying you off. Just calm down, that's crap. Like, that's not how it is. Any developer, right, when you are getting a look at early things, when you're getting a look at early gameplay, whether you go to a test event or whatever, it is standard across the board that they will essentially, many game things that you go to, you sign NDAs for, where, because you're seeing something that is not complete. And so the developer, they don't want, I mean, you've got to think of it from a business perspective as well. The developer, what you will see very often is not what the actual product will be like in the end. Sometimes it is, but very often the whole purpose, I mean, the definition of in development, you know, it's in development, so stuff is ongoing, it's going to change. And so yes, they may be aware of bugs and things like this. I mean, I could literally tell you of things like I've done in the last month where developers have said like, okay, this today, or what, you'll see this today or whatever, but we're aware of it, it's going to change, you know. So it's that whole ongoing thing. So what they don't want to have happen is for you to go to a test event or to get an early access, you know, release, an early version of the game, see a bug, and then make a big video about it going like, this is broken, it's terrible, oh, it didn't play good, it was awful, when they know that literally next week they're going to patch that out, and you know, the game is still like 2 months away from release, you see, because obviously that then creates like a terribly negative slant on their game. Maybe it means that they're going to lose sales there, and for no reason, you know, for no reason. Now, as I say, other times that bug may remain in the game, but you can't come at it from that perspective. You can't make a video going, it's fucked, you know, and then you've got to wait until it's out there really before you can say that. You know, you can always make your content and say, well, you know, we'll have to see what happens with the game and see how they develop and blah blah blah. But so that's really why a lot of the time developers will ask you to not speak about any bugs and things that you see at an early stage, because as I say, they're usually fully aware of it. And I mean, very often as well, when you go to events, they're kind of testing events as well, they're QA events, they want to get your feedback. So if you see issues like bugs or things like this, you know, they then want to, you know, to feed you that back so that they can improve it and fix it and make a better product. But when it comes specifically to this kind of sponsored videos, and also what we're talking about there in terms of mainstream gaming sites and the ratings and things like this, yeah, I fully agree. I mean, personally, I couldn't trust a mainstream gaming review as far as you could throw it. I think they're generally nonsense. But there's multiple issues going on here. I mean, it's a massive topic. It's not just about, you know, people being paid for their opinions or anything like this. It's not about that at all. I mean, and the other thing is as well, you got to think about this. It's like, you know, people that are YouTubers, it's their full-time job, and their full-time job is critiquing and giving opinions on things. So you are paid for your work in the same way that a journalist is paid for their work, right? When you are creating content, when you are making videos, that takes time, and it's what you are doing to, you know, basically earn a living. So it's not dissimilar at all to other critics, like when it comes to food critics, film critics, whatever. They're paid for their opinions by... Now, the only difference is that you're essentially working freelance, right? And the company is basically like, hey, you have a good audience, we would like you to talk about our product because we know you have a good audience. Now, again, it's down to the individual producer how they talk about things, and it's also down to their audience to believe or not believe what they say. Now, it doesn't happen often, but I actually get comments here and there where people are like, oh, you've been paid to say this. It actually happened a lot more to me in Battlefield, but with other things that I've done, it hasn't happened so much, and I think that's because my audience has changed to the point where I just don't get those kind of comments. And I would also like to think that most of you guys that watch me trust and believe what I say. And I think that any of you guys who are long-time subscribers of mine and watch my content and know how I am as a person, know that I'm not the kind of person who would compromise myself in that way. You know, I pride myself on my, strong opinions about things and about trying to create for you guys the best objective opinions that I can and tell you genuinely what I feel about things. And also, like I say, I feel like I'm in a strong position to actually do that because YouTube is not my full-time job. There is no risk to me there because I don't have to worry about pissing off my audience by saying, actually, I don't think this is going to be any good, don't bother about it. It doesn't matter to me if a game doesn't, I don't find myself thinking, oh shit, I've got to make this video this week, or I've got to talk about this game this week. I don't have to do that because it doesn't matter. It's like, as much as I want my channel to grow, I want it to grow, but I want it to grow in the right way, which is by, creating an audience around the style of videos and the opinions that I have and people that want to hear that. Okay, so sponsored videos make up such a small percentage anyway. I mean, for myself, I'm probably only a couple a year, maybe, but obviously bigger channels will have more. But again, I think one of the reasons why people get so irritated about this, and I should just say I'm kind of like free talking here, I'm not really sort of planning my thoughts out, so that's why it's a little bit rambly all over the place. But yeah, larger channels will often have a lot more sponsored content, but it's up to that individual, producer whether or not they declare that as a sponsored video. But I mean, it's pretty obvious to most people when a sponsored video will crop up, because maybe it's just really abstractly out of context for their channel, and you think like, what? Why the hell is that there? Now, again, it's not to say that that's always going to be a sponsored video, but again, you don't know, and that's what I think throws people out. It freaks people out, and people get concerned about it, and they're like, well, then at that point they're like, well, do I really agree? Is he telling me the truth? What is it? I don't know. And what that comes back to is how well you know that producer. Do you feel like they have a character where they would tell you always? Do you feel like they have a character where they would always be completely honest with you about a game? And again, that really just comes back to you and that producer. It's what do you think of them? What is your opinion of them? What regard do you hold that producer in? And that's really what it comes back to. Now, as I say, I've done sponsored videos in the past. I would do them again, but I would only do them if I feel that I can give a legitimate opinion and that people would trust and believe in what I say. Now, again, I have had opportunities to do sponsor videos that I have turned down because I've been like, this game is too abstract for my audience. It's like they're offering, and I've been offered, and they say like, okay, we'll give you this to talk about this, etc., etc. And it's like, I have turned that down because I feel like it doesn't suit. Okay, now I'm not going to go into which games have offered this here, but I have flat out turned stuff down and replied back to them and said, I'm not interested in talking about this for the channel because it's just no interest for my my audience whatsoever. I don't. And I also, there was one game I turned it down, and I said I didn't want to cover it because I thought that their game model was terrible and I disliked their game. So so you can feed it back that way as well. You can sort of, I suppose, burn some small bridges there. But it goes both ways, and it's like, I would only talk about something if I genuinely believe in it, or if I feel there's a genuinely constructive element to have there. Not just saying like, oh, I'm going to talk about this today because, whatever, and then, basically giving false thoughts. That's really, really the worst thing. And it's true, unfortunately, sponsored videos to a degree, depending on who is doing them, that is something that will happen. But again, it's not going away. It's not going to go away, and it's down to people to tell that producer what they think of, them, I suppose, for making that kind of content. It's down to the audience, like it is in the same way that, people should, vote with their feet when it comes to buying games. It's the audience that controls that. If a YouTube producer sees, a massive drop-off in views or a massive, turnaround in dislikes or whatever, they'll take that. They'll understand that. Now, as I say, for myself, arguably it wouldn't matter so much because I'm not full-time, but I do care about growing my channel, and I care about my audience, and I care about sort of the type of audience that I have on my channel here. And by and large, I feel like I have a really awesome audience, and that's actually why I created this series as well, because I get such good feedback and thoughts from you guys. That's why I wanted to make this series. But as I say, you know, a bigger producer, they need to think about that, because it's literally their livelihood, it's their job. So making content that pisses off their audience is going to negatively impact them directly, and that's a problem. So it really comes down to the audience and the kind of feedback that they want to give there. So I'll just round up by saying, you know, this kind of stuff is not going away, all right? It's been around for ages, it's still going to be around. It's not just mainstream gaming media, you know, old school media with the websites and journalists and all this kind of stuff. It's YouTube producers, it's everybody, okay? These kind of things are not going to go away. However, that doesn't constitute, you know, the bread and butter. It doesn't constitute the majority of content that you see. It tends to be around a release, and what they're trying to do is the marketing teams for those games have a budget, and they want to basically create more hype. They want to create more, you know, not even necessarily hype, they just want to create more conversation around the game. So personally, I don't really, I mean, me, myself, my own opinion, and you guys can say, well, obviously you're going to say this, Luton, because you're a producer, and it's like, if you want to believe that, fair enough, or you can just literally hear my opinion. My opinion is that I don't really care one way about a sponsored video, providing it's declared that it's sponsored, because if it's a sponsored video and the person is going, this game's amazing, it's the best thing ever, you can kind of go, I'm not really sure I believe you. But if they're saying things like, hey, you know, I like this about the game, but I didn't like this about the game, or they're just not even giving an opinion, they're just showcasing stuff, that's not negative, that's not a bad thing, because all you're doing is you're just creating content, and all it is that around a release or something like this, you know, game companies, they want people to talk about their games, they want people to create content about their games. Now, it's down to you as a viewer whether you want to watch that content and be a part of that. Myself personally, it depends on your relationship with that producer, and if you watch that producer continually and you hear the things that they say and the things that they talk about, you get to know that person, you get to know that producer. Whereas it's very different with mainstream gaming media, okay? With mainstream gaming media, it's just a journalist, and you know, you can actually tell, I suppose, from the things that they write and the things that they talk about. When it comes down to ratings, that's a completely different matter, and maybe, you know, I mean, I think giving games actually ratings in general is a really stupid thing to do, because it's very subjective, okay? I mean, look at Alien Isolation. Alien Isolation didn't get the best reviews, but the reason it didn't get the best reviews, in my opinion, was because the gaming journalists who were testing that game sucked at playing that game. You know, Alien Isolation was a difficult game, and I think they struggled with it, and therefore gave it bad reviews off the basis of that. But I actually thought it was an amazing game, and so did many you know, people that played the game. So it just didn't really, the two things didn't really sync up together. But as I say, on the whole, I don't really perceive it as being a negative thing, although it obviously can be a negative thing. Now, people are going to disagree, agree, that's up to you. But essentially, like I've said a few times now, it comes down to you, the audience, and, you know, how you think about it, what you believe. You know, if I posted a sponsored video for The Division where I was running around and saying, you know, I really love this, I dislike this, you know, would you believe my opinions or would you not believe my opinions? I'd like to think that most people would, because I'm quite critical about games. I will literally hammer games for stuff, and I personally think that some companies that I have worked with, it has affected my work with them. Now, not necessarily with individuals, but you don't know, and you can never know, because sometimes you'll find out that, hey, people have gone to things, people haven't gone to things, somebody's got access to something, somebody doesn't. It just changes around all the time. It's very difficult to know whether a publisher or developer or somebody that you've worked with in the past has changed their opinion of you. You just can't know. But I'll tell you what I do know is that I love making content which is about my opinion, and I really believe in giving people my honest opinion and my critical opinion about games, because I think it's really, really important. And as I say, I actually think sometimes people are scared to give a true critical opinion about games, because I think often that, you know, being positive in YouTube videos, being like, oh, this is great, this works really awesome, it's fantastic, you know, a lot of the time that sells to an audience a lot better than if you're just sitting there going, oh, you know, actually I don't like this, blah blah blah, you know. So I think often, forget about sponsored videos, I think just YouTube producers in general often err on the side of being more positive about a game, because they know that that's better for an audience, because audiences tend to respond better to kind of positive videos rather than negative videos. Whereas I myself, I tend to just make content that I think is important to make. So if I think something is a bad feature or I dislike it intently, I will say so. And there are some other really, you know, great producers that I've worked with who do this in a similar way. And I often feel, you know, get a bit of a raw end of the stick from their audience, when in fact they actually make really, really excellent content. Anyway, oh my god, I've just rambled and rambled about this. I'm going to have to timestamp this video now, because I've talked about this one topic for so long. But it was a topic I wanted to talk about in general, and it was good that it got brought up. So that's my thoughts. Tell me your thoughts about this topic down below. Let's move on to a couple of other short ones now. So Arma 3, my Jim the Mortarman video that we had this week was another one. Some great comments here. Jim is actually the head of guard training for CSAT. He travelled back in time and served in the US Army under the name John Rambo. There was plenty of Jim doesn't give a fuck your A10 from Jim. Jim don't play like that. And of course, Jim is a god. If you missed that video, you need to go check it out. I'll put it in the comments down below and you can see why those great comments came in there. But I wanted to share the beautiful thoughts of people on that video. It was really awesome. Arma is fantastic for just getting those moments. And it just absolutely love that game. Okay, so we've got Flame's comment on The Division this week, and Flame wrote such a text war that I couldn't ignore it. So I think Flame potentially might have changed some of his opinions on The Division here as well. I do have my Division review coming up, guys, when I'm still sort of on my way there to 30. I got locked out a bit from playing this week because of being unwell, which was irritating for me. But I have been talking with people and sort of generally aware about stuff, so I can maybe offer a couple of little opinions about things. So Flame says, my thoughts on Division are so far pretty extensive, and like you, I'm somewhat torn. He says, on a very logical level, I have to agree that the game is mechanically repetitive, the side missions extremely so, but on another level, I don't really mind this. He says, I've helped you, Fuse, Super, LB, and a couple of other friends through some of the main story missions, and only now, after 4 or 5 playthroughs, am I starting to find these tedious. Perhaps I'm more used to grinding, having played Guild Wars 2, an MMO, although it's albeit not that grindy, and World of Warships, which is insanely grindy. But I feel like the team play, diversity of weapons, and open environments in the game in Division allow you to make the most of what is technically a very repetitive experience. The thing that I'm actually worried about the most, though, during the beta was probably the question of content, which seemed as if it could be quite limited, and strangely, I haven't really found a satisfying answer. On the one hand, I was worried that the map might be too small and lack variation, but that really hasn't been the case, particularly once you get into the Dark Zone. While I would still like to see other areas of Manhattan, I'm fairly satisfied with what there is at the moment, though a little more detail on that later. The other key aspect of content that I thought might be missing or limited was story missions, narratives. There are more than I originally anticipated, and to be honest, those that exist are quite well constructed and intense. But at the same time, I still have to wonder what the game will be like after they're finished. On top of this, they and the game in general seem to lack a central narrative, and this makes the story seem disconnected and meandering. I completely agree with that. When I get onto The Division, it isn't because I'm compelled to find out what happens next, but because I want to play with friends, get that next level, or find more loot. For some time I was worried about enemy variety, but this concern has largely dissipated, and instead I think my greatest direct criticism for the game is actually its lack of a significant human element. The game includes a startling amount of visual detail, and some effort is made to make you care for the civilians in your base of operations, but by and large, all the characters in the game are incredibly flat or basic caricatures. We know virtually nothing about any of the key characters and are given no reason to care, and while a lot of time is given to the expansive vistas of New York City, virtually none is given to the people who live in it. While it's traumatizing to hear the screams of a civilian being burned alive by cleaners, most repeat the same basic and uninteresting lines, wander off mutely or scurry off in fear. It's here that I think the game has missed its greatest opportunity, as every disaster is composed of countless individuals having experiences of tragedy and triumph. As much as New York is the Empire State Building and Grand Central, it's also that tiny corner shop, that old independent bookstore, and the family restaurant passed down through generations. The Dark Zone is also a bit of a puzzle because although that initial experience that you described in the video was terrible, I haven't had any similar since. I'll actually talk about that in a second. As you go further north, the DZ seems to become more interesting visually in terms of gameplay. Genuinely difficult enemies actively roam, and when encountered can be quite aggressive, requiring a certain level of tact to engage. Provided that my experiences continue to be positive, again I'll talk about that in a second, I think the Dark Zone could actually be the key thing that makes the game experience excellent instead of mediocre. That all aside, the game is visually astonishing and movement through environments is incredibly fluid, making the game very pleasing to interact with on a basic level. Joining with friends is seamless and easy, something easy to miss, but that has a huge impact when it doesn't work in other games. On top of this, the game doesn't fail spectacularly in any specific area. It's not about to be my game of the year or even in the top 10, but having played many hours of it, I do not regret my purchase and look forward to what expansions and DLC bring. So I pretty much have to agree with Flame on this. As I say, I'm still not reached max rank, and you'd be like, Jesus Christ, Luton, come on, get it together. It's like, yeah, I know, but working full time, unwell, those are my excuses for the last week as to why I haven't maxed it out yet. I'm pretty close, so come on. But anyway, the other guys in my squad, though, are doing very well in terms of that higher end level, and they have some experiences that they have been sort of speaking to me about. Now, as I said, Flame there at the end was talking about the Dark Zone and how that was his thing. But bear in mind, he commented about, I don't know, maybe a week ago, talking about this now, and he was saying that the Dark Zone had some bad experiences where they got camped out by people and stuff, but on the whole, it had been better, and he'd had some good experiences. That is until today, when I was actually speaking to him on Skype earlier on, and he was telling me about these guys who, in the higher end Dark Zone, had basically really hardcore maxed out their gear to the point which Flame and Fuse, and maybe I think Flame was Super, and a couple of the other guys, they literally couldn't do anything against these guys. They were just like one-hitting them almost. They were destroying them, and then they were camping the sort of instance area that they were in, so they couldn't really escape. They couldn't go anywhere. They were trapped. And Flame was saying, like, this is ridiculous because it's essentially ended our gameplay session for the day. They couldn't get away from these guys. They needed to kind of do what they were doing, and they couldn't escape from them. Now, I have to say, for me personally, this was one of my huge concerns with The Division, was that this is the kind of situation that you would encounter. And to be honest, all kind of open world-ish MMO style games, it's just how it kind of is now. You can't escape the fact that people are just dicks. It's just the way it is, unfortunately. And if you can't handle that, if it's not something that you can deal with in a game, then maybe you just need to say, this game is not for me. And it sucks if you enjoy a lot of the other elements, but if it's a large part of the game, you have to accept that it's a large part of the game, that having other people around is going to have those issues. You can't escape from it. Again, I'll just use my experiences in World of Warcraft. That game on the whole was very, very enjoyable, but when you cross through certain areas, you could potentially be PvP attacked, and I had experiences where I actually did get locked down, camped, and I couldn't do anything. I had to even call people to come assist me to get away from there, because I had maybe 3-4 people just locking me down for like an hour or something, and I couldn't get away. And you say, well, what would you do? Well, you could go offline. Yeah, you could go offline and come back later, but essentially it's not the point. It's the point is that the mechanic exists to lock you out of being able to complete and play the gameplay that you want to play. So I think Flame would probably retract his sort of statement about the Dark Zone being really, really positive there. But I will say, I think overall their experience has been pretty positive. And if these kind of things happen only now and again, who cares? It's just like one time. It's not a big deal. It's frustrating at the time, but overall, if it's not happening to you all the time, it's not the end of the world. If it's happening all the time, that's game breaking, and they really, as a developer, need to consider that. But overall, like, with my thoughts about The Division just in general are, I generally feel like there's some things that I feel are too repetitive. There's some things that I feel are like a missed opportunity, but by and large, the mechanics are what carry the game. The mechanics, just the gameplay, the gunplay, the moving through objects, the fluidity of that, that's the stuff that is enjoyable. That's the stuff which you come back to for it. And like Flame was saying there, the seamlessness in which you can kind of group up with other people, that is a huge positive. Because if that didn't work, if that was a thing, if it was a bit glitchy, if it was a pain in the ass, you'd just be like, screw this, I can't be bothered, But the fact that you can, the fact that it works so seamless, is a big, big positive. So this game is an interesting one. Visually, it's fantastic. Mechanically, it plays out really good. But overall, some of the concepts and decisions that were made there, I'm still not sure. I personally feel like the game would have worked a hell of a lot better had it been I have various ideas about how it could have played out better. Faction-specific sides, I think, was one thing. There was a fantastic game mode in World of Warcraft called Alterac Valley, where you had two factions and you had to battle against one another up and down the valley there, right? It was a huge valley. It took ages to complete, But whilst you were in this valley and you'd have actually those kind of running battles going on with one another, you could also go off and side quest, and you could complete quests which would give extra resources to your side to, complete the overall goal. And I feel like this is something that could have happened in The Division. You could have had like two factions kind of battling it out throughout the city, and maybe overall over time there wasn't really any kind of maybe movement in terms of territory control there, but it could have been a way to sort of have those mechanics where you choose a faction and join, whether you want to be sort of like a rioter, that kind of gang style thing, or whether you want to be part of The Division. That would have been a really interesting mechanic to have there. Another thing that I thought would have been cool, or very different of course to how The Division actually is, but I was watching the movie Escape from New York this week, and in Escape from New York, if you haven't seen it, it's an amazing film, but it's basically it's got Kurt Russell, and he's basically Snake Plissken. He has to go into New York, and New York is now Manhattan anyway, is basically one gigantic prison. It's locked off from the outside, and the whole of Manhattan Island is just this prison where people get thrown into and then just forgotten about. So the whole place is just anarchy. It's just like crazies and a couple of gangs and all this kind of stuff. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, damn, you know, this would have worked a hell of a lot better for the Division than what they currently have going on there. If you essentially, you were thrown onto the island as like a prisoner or something along these lines, and you had to survive. You could maybe make clans and gangs together with your friends, and maybe you somehow control territory points or buildings, or you can have like a safe house. You go out and you can do quests to survive. Maybe it's not an RPG, maybe it's just different style. I mean, I was literally just randomly thinking about these kind of different things there. Other options as well. I think that the Division would have worked 100% very, very well just as a PvE co-op game. So you don't have the whole PvP aspect. And again, I know some people are going to freak out and be like, no, the PvP is amazing, blah blah. You know, you agree to disagree. I just think it would have worked actually fine and even a lot better as a PvE experience where you don't have to worry about people dicking you around. It's like, you know, I'm fine with that. I don't have a massive issue with it. I'm not like freaking out and being like, oh, it's so terrible, I hate it. You know, it's fine, whatever. You know, you get those, like I say, you get those moments which are really intense and exciting. You also get moments which suck and really kind of ruin your night's gameplay. I think that from what I have played, the thing that I enjoy about it is not those encounters. The thing that I enjoy about the Division is just in general the mechanics of that gameplay, and so I don't need those PvP encounters for me to get the most out of the game. If they just kind of fleshed out the narrative stuff a bit more, maybe they had some really tight, you know, more focused, you know, more of those sort of large instances where you're fighting against a boss and stuff, more of that, more narrative, more mini quests which are unique and all this kind of stuff. If you had a lot of those things going on there, I think you would have like a really, you know, interesting game to play. If they'd fleshed out the narrative a hell of a lot more than they did, if they gave some of the characters some really great backstory and so on and so on, and then carried that through into the DLCs, and did it as a co-op experience, and maybe took a little bit longer with the leveling, or just took leveling out completely, I don't know. You know, all that kind of stuff I think would have been really, really fantastic. It would have played out a lot better. So I still haven't formed my complete opinions about the Division, but overall I think, you know, like I say, Flame gave some great thoughts there. Everybody's been giving really good thoughts about the Division, but I think my final conclusion thought on the Division is that it's the most split of any game I've seen of recent times. People can't seem to come down on like a kind of positive or negative about it. I actually think that it's a game where I really feel like just I couldn't say. This is the thing, it's a really weird one for me. It's really unusual where I'm in a situation where people ask me, like, should I get the game? My honest answer, I couldn't say. I couldn't say to someone, yes, get it, or don't get it. It's a really weird one for me. I usually am pretty clear about, like, yes, buy a game or don't buy a game, but with the Division, I couldn't tell you. I just really couldn't. It's so subjective, some of the elements that are there, and I feel like the mechanics and stuff of it are very, very enjoyable indeed, but other elements I've heard good and very bad things about, and it's all just subjective opinion. So it's very, very hard to say. It's just the most split game. I've had the most conversations about this game. I've had the most discussions about it, about lots of different elements in there. Is it good? Is it bad? How, you know, are they going to support the game properly with DLC? What's that going to be like? Is it just a loot grind, etc, etc? There's just so much. My review on this is going to be a difficult one. It's going to be really hard for me to kind of bring my thoughts together on it. I'm going to try really hard to bring together, like, probably one of the best reviews I can do about a game. I think it's going to be really difficult, but yeah, anyway, we'll see where we go. So that's below the line for this week, guys. Thanks for all your comments in the last week. I have some more videos and things coming up. Last thought today, please go check out Planet Coaster. Planet Coaster is out. Well, basically it's out tomorrow for the alpha. If you've had the early access there, Planet Coaster 22nd. I actually have some early videos out today talking about the game, so go check those out. I'll also put a link for Looting Gaming in the comments, so please go check out my second channel, guys, where you can find all that content. Thanks for supporting me as always, guys. Thanks for watching the channel, and look forward to posting another Below the Line very soon. Drop your comments on these topics down below. If you enjoyed the video, drop it a like. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you next time.